Good morning, everybody. Hello, and welcome back to Hot Mess Life Coach Season 2, Episode 4. I am your host, Brian Hogan, both a hot mess and a life coach, because yes, that is too allowed. This is the show for people trying to get it together while the world seems to be falling apart. And I like to remind you that it just seems to be falling apart, but actually what's happening is we're living through the transformation of human consciousness, which is going to have its growing pains. It's going to have its ups and downs. It's going to be a gift in the end, like any other pregnancy, but it's going to be hard to bear, as any woman who's ever given birth will tell you, I'm assuming. I don't want to speak out of turn. But today, what I want to talk to you about is setting boundaries, and how setting boundaries is really an act of kindness, because of all the benefits that boundaries create, both in our lives and the lives of the people for whom we are setting the boundaries. And hopefully they're setting their own boundaries. And when everybody has their boundaries, everybody knows each other's limits, and everybody can act in the most liberated, most free way possible because of boundaries. So yes, boundaries actually create freedom. If there were no boundaries on a football field, then it would be chaos. But instead, because there's boundaries and rules, we can play this awesome game, and we can have all kinds of freedom and fun playing the game of football because there are boundaries. It's the same in life. Without boundaries, it's chaos. With boundaries, it can be fun, it can be experimental, it can be playful, and it can seem like a game. Like what Bill Hicks, stand-up comedian, used to say, life is just a game. Life is a game. Part of what makes it a game is because of the boundaries. We have rules on this planet about gravity. We have rules on this planet about laws of physics. And even though quantum physics is now breaking all those rules, and a whole mess of other laws have come out as a result of it, there are still laws. There are laws that govern the quantum realm. There are laws that govern the large scale realm of us, physical reality. Without the laws, it's chaos. With the laws, with the boundaries, it's a game. It's a fun and exciting game that we get to play, this game called life. So I want to talk today about how boundaries really are a form of kindness. But let's get into it a little bit. So what is a boundary? A researcher defined a boundary this way. I forget her name, so I'm very sorry, Miss Science researcher person, but this is what she said. A boundary is a limit or edge that defines you as separate from others. That's just a very basic definition. A limit or edge that defines you as separate from others. Another quote about boundaries comes from Cheryl Richardson, and this one says, if you want to live an authentic, meaningful life, you need to master the art of disappointing people, of upsetting others, and hurting feelings, and living with the reality that some people just don't like you, and they never will. I added that last part. But that's okay. Like, as a recovering people pleaser myself, I get it. We don't want people not to like us. And so we want to violate our own boundaries all the time because, hey, I want you to like me. I want to please you. I want to be in everyone's good graces all the time, even no matter how exhausting that might be for me to try to get into everybody's good graces all the time, because you can't. Like, people are funky. People are grouchy. People are weird. And in fact, sometimes if we try to get in someone's good graces, it can be irritating as heck to them. Like, they really, like, they can sense that, they can see that. Like, so people pleasing actually, in a way, can actually backfire on you and be pleasing to nobody. It's not pleasing to you because you're violating your own boundaries and you're violating your own truth, and you're causing yourself to live in a world of exhaustion or resentment or both. And oftentimes people pleasing isn't pleasing the other person because they're like, oh my God, that waifish simp just does whatever I say. It's so exhausting. Like, the only time people pleasing is great for the other party is if they're like a narcissist and super toxic. And in that case, you want to get out of that too, because that's not good for you. In neither situation is it good for you to be people pleasing at the expense of your own truth, your own self, your own boundaries, and your own joy. So examples of healthy boundaries include things like, and these are countercultural, so they're going to seem like, but this is what it is. Healthy boundaries: declining anything that you don't want to do. Yeah, anything. It's like shedding off this cultural idea that we have obligations, that we have etiquette. You know, forget that. Forget it. You do what you want. Not from a place of total selfishness to the exclusion of other people's needs and desires, but not from a sense of obligation or from a sense of duty. You know, if somebody invites you out to a party and you don't want to go, but you feel like it's going to hurt their feelings if you do go, and the reason you do go is because you don't want to hurt their feelings, you're not going to have a very good time, because you're going to be like, oh, why did I go? They dragged me. I mean, of course, if you're trying to challenge yourself, like you're shy and you're working through your shyness, that's a different story. Then that's not one of your boundaries. That's like an area of growth for you, and you're going to push yourself to go. But that's not because the other person would be mad if you didn't go. That's because you want to push past your own shyness. If you're fine with your shyness and you don't want to push past it, and you're trying to do something merely out of obligation, it's going to backfire. If the other person's not going to have a good time, you're not going to have a good time, and you're going to be violating your boundaries. So don't do anything you don't want to do. Just don't. You don't have to. Who says you do? Like some school marm from when you were in second grade said, do what the teacher told you, respect authority. Well, you're the authority now. You're a grown-ass adult and you're the authority. So you do what you want to do. Another example of a healthy boundary is expressing your feelings responsibly. So there's two keys to this one. Expressing your feelings. Yeah, you got to do it, because when you hold stuff inside, it's just going to stay bottled up, and it's going to like work on you instead of being out there and being known and being the truth. If people don't know your feelings, they can't possibly respect them. So if you don't express your boundaries, people can't not violate them. They have to violate them. They have no choice, because they have no idea what your boundaries are. So you've got to express your feelings, but you also have to do it responsibly, which means not being a jackass, not being demanding, not expecting that other people are always going to do exactly what you say just because you express your feelings. Expressing your feelings responsibly is a healthy boundary. Expressing your feelings willy-nilly could actually indicate a lack of boundaries. So we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. Another example of healthy boundaries is talking about your experiences honestly. So if somebody asks you, like, how was that for you? And you say, oh, it was fine. It was just fine. But it wasn't fine. You're stuffing down your own truth. And whenever we lie to ourselves, it takes a toll on our body. There's piles of scientific evidence and literature out there and research to suggest that when we don't express and live in our truth, it backfires on us, both physiologically, mentally, emotionally. It even can hurt our cells, like epigenetically. So you really want to talk about your experiences honestly. Like, you don't need to be rude. And you can also say sometimes, like, I don't want to talk about that right now. That's better than saying it was fine if it wasn't fine. Just admit that you don't want to talk about it. And if the other person pushes, that's just another example of setting a boundary. Now is not the time for me. I'm sorry you don't like it, but now is not the time to talk about this. Another example of healthy boundaries is replying in the moment. I know that seems paradoxical to what I just said, but when I talk about replying in the moment, what I mean is addressing something in the moment that has violated your boundaries. There's nothing worse than you have an interaction with somebody and you think everything was fine, and then 2 weeks later they come to you and say, that thing in the mall that you did last week on Tuesday, January 2nd, that really hurt my feelings. It's like, what? Like, I don't even remember that thing. Like, you're being hypersensitive. You're way over the top with this. So sometimes we need a little time to process. I get that. But the more you set healthy boundaries, the more able you are going to be to reply in the moment when things bother you or when things are crossing your boundaries. And the more you can learn to reply in the moment, the healthier your relationships are going to be, because people always know where they stand with you. And that's really key in relationships. If people are always wondering, when is the other shoe going to drop, because you take weeks to process through your hurt feelings and then try to make somebody else for them all over again, that's not setting healthy boundaries, and not for yourself and not for them, because now you've been stewing on some kind of like thing for weeks, and they've been thinking everything's fine for weeks, and then boom, it's like a bomb drops. So rather, instead, reply in the moment. When you do that, though, here's another way to express healthy boundaries, is to address the problems directly with the person involved rather than with a third party. So sometimes we need to process, like, I'm a verbal processor, so if I do need to involve a third party to get a litmus test on, like, am I overreacting or not, that's okay to a degree, but you don't want to be involving a third party who also knows the person that you're involved in the conflict with. That there's a fine line between, double checking your bias, double checking your blind spots, and gossiping. And your heart will know the difference. When you're gossiping, you're going to feel that rush of dopamine, like, ooh, this feels good to say, but it's also going to feel icky afterwards and inside. When you're really trying to double check your bias and double check your blind spots, you go to a neutral third party, preferably somebody the person you're in conflict with doesn't even know, so that there's no hint of a dopamine rush for talking about somebody behind their back. And instead, what you're really doing is getting an objective, honest opinion about how the interaction went based on your description with the other person. One of my clinical mental health counseling professors, we're doing a law and ethics conference together in a couple of weeks, and he said the other day in our practice training, you want to make sure you go to people for feedback who are going to tell you what you need to hear and not tell you what you want to hear. That's a little bit like this. You don't want to go to people who you can get on your side against the other person. You want to go to people who are going to tell you the truth about where you might be in a blind spot and tell you the truth about where they might be toxic. You want the truth, not somebody just on your side for the sake of validating your already hurt feelings. Another example of a healthy boundary is making your expectations clear rather than assuming people will figure them out. I know this one should go without saying, but we can't have a discussion about boundaries without talking about clarity and expectations, because part of the reason boundaries are kind is because they create clarity. So making your expectations clear rather than assuming people are going to figure them out is a key step in setting healthy boundaries. We are not mind readers. Like, we oftentimes like to think, well, it's a sign of love. It's my love language if somebody can just like guess at my needs and fulfill my needs. But that's not a sign of love. It's actually it's an unconscious form of manipulation we're doing when we try to get someone to meet our needs without telling them what our needs are. It's a weird game. We don't play it consciously. We don't play it because we're bad or wrong, but it's a sign that we don't have healthy boundaries, and we need to learn how to set healthy boundaries. So what exactly is a boundary? Well, it's an invisible line you draw around yourself to identify what is acceptable behavior and what is unacceptable behavior. The beauty of boundaries is that they're not fixed. They're fluid, they evolve, they change over time. You know, you can have looser limits around extending yourself to others, and that's easier to do when you're younger and when you're childless. And, you know, as you grow up, as you gain insight, you might start to get a quicker read on people, and you can tell who's a narcissist, who's an energy vampire, who you want to guard your time with and against. And that's fine. Like, you're not judging them in the sense of being judgmental. You're just evaluating and deciding, hey, okay, I want to have a healthy boundary with this person until I know them better. Or I want to have a healthy boundary with like how late I stay out because I know the amount of sleep I need, which is different in your 20s than it is in your 40s. So your boundaries will change over time. Some people love boundaries, like me, because they represent structure and order and rules. And I have like a 3-ring binder for everything. Other people can see these as like totally limiting and an unyielding set of laws, and there's no gray areas. And so boundaries are awful and black and white and hard. But a really critical part of having a healthy psyche is deciding what's right for you, what's the right amount of tension in terms of boundaries in your life. So you can have like psychological distress relating to overly flexible and loose boundaries or overly rigid boundaries. You want to find the way to set boundaries that's right for you. And that comes with going into your body and each boundary you set, making sure that it feels like freedom to you and doesn't feel like a trap or dread. With that, we talked about that in a previous episode in season 1. So if you want to look that up, it's about the wisdom in your body. But I'll talk about that. I talk about that a lot. So boundaries come in a lot of different forms: physical boundaries, mental boundaries, emotional boundaries, financial boundaries, moral boundaries, sexual boundaries, and spiritual boundaries. Physical boundaries relate to your personal space, your privacy. Are you comfortable with affection? Are you more reserved? Do you like to shake hands when you meet somebody? It's just good for you to think about these things and know them for yourself. Mental boundaries are about your thoughts, obviously, about your values and your opinions. Are you capable of having an open and flexible mind or attitude? You know, signs of weak mental boundaries include like reacting in an overly emotional manner, like becoming defensive or rigid or combative when people don't agree with you. You don't need to react in any of those ways. If you have your own healthy mental boundaries, you can say, you're allowed to have your opinion and I don't agree with it. And that's just fine. You don't even have to tell them you don't agree. If you have a really strong mental boundary, you can just let their hogwash opinion wash right over you because it doesn't matter. Emotional boundaries are about withstanding different opinions from yours. So this is similar to what I talked about in mental boundaries. You know, you don't need to dispense advice. You don't need to fix people. You don't need to take on other people's problems as your own. You recognize you're not to blame when people get upset, that we're all grown-ass adults and who are responsible for our own feelings. So you don't let guilt get in the way of your decisions. You might still feel guilt because of whatever childhood trauma you're working through, but you know that that guilt is related to your own upbringing, and it's not actually something you did wrong when you set a boundary or when somebody got upset or when you put a logical, loving limit on something. Financial boundaries, how you spend money, how you save, how you give, your budget, that kind of thing. Moral boundaries are about aligning with your core values, so maybe it's not accepting intolerant attitudes, or you don't put up with people that lie and cheat. That's a moral boundary. Or if you're a liar and a cheat, then maybe your moral boundary is something different. Who am I to judge? You set your own boundaries and I'll set my boundaries with you liar. Okay, so that either way. Sexual boundaries are about your comfort level around intimacy and sexual behaviors, and that's up to you. That's nobody else's to decide. And the last one, spiritual boundaries, is about defining your religious beliefs, your spiritual beliefs, whether that pertains to God, some other deity, a supernatural being, or the universe, or the flow of energy. It doesn't really matter what name you put on it, what you call it. Your spiritual boundaries are yours, and it's important for you to set those and understand those. If you're raised in a house where your parents or caretakers were overly harsh or permissive with discipline, chances are boundaries might be a challenge for you. The good news is you're no longer that terrified 5-year-old person, and you can set your own boundaries now. You can make proper adjustments, and you can learn to live a boundary life, which makes life more fun and more like a game, which is what we talked about at the beginning. So a couple common reasons for unhealthy boundaries. Boundaries weren't taught to you as a child. When your needs and wants were not respected by your parents, caretakers, family members, you maybe internalized that you weren't important. Well, you are important. You're deeply important. There's nobody more important than you, and you, and you, and you. And it goes for all of you and me. Okay, we're equals on this planet. And you are important, and your needs are important. Another common reason for unhealthy boundaries might be that you're a people pleaser. You were the good girl or you were the good boy. I definitely am a recovering people pleaser. Not recovered, recovering. I still say yes to too many things, but now I cancel. Like, if I realize that I violated my own boundary, I'll cancel, because I'm not going to honor a commitment because you have to honor your commitments. If it was the wrong thing for me to commit to, I will politely decline, apologize, and say, I didn't realize when I said yes that I'd be overextending myself, but I realize it now, and I'm sorry to disappoint. So just because you don't want to offend anyone doesn't mean you have to follow through on tasks that you're not up to. My life coach and mentor, Martha Beck, told me once, why put off until tomorrow what you can cancel? And I love it. I love it so much. And that's basically, I want to put that on a t-shirt. It's so good. So why put off until tomorrow what you can cancel? Yeah. So if you overextended yourself, cancel. Done. Just get it off your schedule. Okay. Another common reason for unhealthy boundaries is you were the caretaker, or you were like the parent child. When your role growing up was to take care of the needs of other children, other siblings, maybe even you have to take care of your parents' needs, then your needs were put on hold. And that means you might have internalized the idea that if you do something for yourself, it's selfish. If you have to stop and take care of yourself, it's selfish, but it's not. Taking care of yourself is actually kindness. Kindness to you and kindness to everybody else. Because when you take care of yourself, you can show up as the best version of yourself in the world. So sometimes some challenges, if you have trouble setting boundaries, are emotional vomiting. When you wear every emotion on your sleeve and you start sharing intimate details, sexual details with people you barely know, that might be a sign that you're struggling with boundaries. Or if you become immediately intimate with people upon meeting them, and you think indiscriminate friendships and love interests, and you just go like really deep, really fast, and everyone's your soulmate until a couple weeks later they disappoint you and then you're devastated. That might be a sign of unhealthy boundaries, or you're all or nothing in relationships. That's very similar. So getting firm on your boundaries takes time and patience, but it is worth it, because resentment builds up when you allow others to infiltrate your mind and your time and your physical space, and you'll feel taken advantage of, and you will want to rebel. This could be a tantrum. This could be a scream fest. This could be saying things you later regret. But then you have a guilt hangover after you do all that, because constantly doubting yourself means you're stuck in this cycle of indecision, avoidance, rumination, and you compensate by making other people the recipients of your anger. So I want to switch right now and talk about why boundaries are kindness. This is the most important part here, because it's countercultural. We are not taught to set boundaries. Yeah, if you follow mental health circles and you follow coaching circles, then you hear about boundaries here and there. But if you don't, or even if you do, you don't hear about them in any other area of your life. And the other people in your life who don't follow the mental health stuff and the coaching stuff are like, who are you to set a boundary? Like, no, I want you when I want you. Your time is my time, especially at work. It's like you sometimes we have to take our work home with us. We hear that phrase a lot. So boundaries are countercultural, and I love being countercultural because all the best artists are countercultural. So let's jump on this countercultural bandwagon and set boundaries, set creative, artistic, flourishing boundaries. Here's why boundaries are kindness. 1, because they're honest, and honesty is kind. 2, boundaries create clarity, and clarity is kind both to you and the person you're being clear with. Another reason they're kind is because they protect you from resentment and they protect you from burnout. When you're setting boundaries, you're allowing yourself to say, this is exactly where I can go and no further. And that's kind to yourself, because if you don't violate your own boundaries, you can't resent other people for making you violate your boundaries, which in the end you chose to do. And the other thing is that they protect you from burnout, because when you set boundaries, those boundaries are because that is what you can handle, or that is what you're willing to handle. And so you won't go beyond that, and then you won't burn out. Boundaries open the door to more intimacy. Now, this one is if it's desired. If the boundary you're setting is because you don't want intimacy, then that's fine, and it won't lead to more intimacy. It'll lead to you protecting yourself from an intimacy you don't want. But in general, if you set a boundary with somebody and the boundary is unrelated to the intimacy, like the boundary is like, I can't come over until 7 p.m. every night, and that's just the way it is, right? Like once that's known and you set that boundary and that's clear, then nobody has hurt feelings when you're not coming over until 7, and intimacy can actually grow and be created. So boundaries can create intimacy in all situations where the boundary is around intimacy. Boundaries create self-efficacy, confidence, and empowerment, because they train you to honor your own truth. They train you to live in your body, to listen to your body, and to honor what your body is telling you. If you're too tired to do something, if doing something feels like dread, whether doing something feels like freedom. And the most important one, honestly, is that boundaries create self-respect, because when we're honoring boundaries, when we're making boundaries, we're honoring our truth and our limits. And that means we're respecting what it is we need and what we want. So some examples for me, like I don't like small talk at parties. So when I go somewhere with a buddy or something, I will tell them, like, I have like a 45-minute limit on small talk, and then I need to disappear, whether that's out to the veranda or out to the back patio, or if there isn't a place like that, I'm going to sneak off to the car and I'm going to go in and I'm going to shut the door and I'm going to lay down and I'm going to take a power nap. And I may or may not come back inside for another 45-minute round of small talk. But it's not personal. Like I want to go to this party with you, but you like to hang out for 3 hours and I like to hang out for an hour tops. So we can make that work. You know what I mean? Or I'll drive separately and tell them I'm going to leave early, and they can't get offended when I duck out. I mean, they can still get offended. That's on them. We don't control what other people do. But you set your boundary, and hopefully when you set your boundary clearly and kindly and gently, the people in your life worth keeping in your life will respect your boundaries. The only people who get angry at you when you set boundaries are those who got some kind of advantage out of you not having any. Let me tell you that again. The only people who get angry at you for setting boundaries are the people who got some kind of advantage out of you not having any. So when you set your boundaries with people that love and respect you, they're going to love and respect your boundaries too, especially if you're not delivering them with some kind of blame or anger, but you're just saying, this is what's right for me right now. Jonah Hill is a good example. He's got this documentary out now, and Jonah, if you're watching this one day, don't take this the wrong way, but his weight has fluctuated up and down, and he started to get a lot of compliments on his Twitter when he was losing a lot of weight recently, and he had to set a boundary on Twitter and say, actually, comments about my appearance, whether good or bad, don't make me feel good, and I would rather not have them. And that was his way of trying to set a boundary with his fans. And that's beautiful. We have every right to say that. Now, he can't control if any of his fans are going to honor that boundary or not, but he can block the ones that don't, or he can at least know that the wave of comments about his appearance is going to go way down because he set that boundary. So we think a boundary is saying something like, don't speak to me that way. But it's not. That's just a demand. A boundary is saying something like, when you speak to me in that tone, I'm going to have to disengage because I don't deserve it and it makes me feel like XYZ. and then you follow through on your boundary. Boundaries are about being clear about what we will and won't do when the lines are crossed. It's not about telling others what to do, because we can't control other people. So that would be a fool's errand. But we can control ourselves, and we can control our own feelings. We can't control how other people react to our boundaries. People are going to be hurt when we set boundaries, but that's not your responsibility, frankly. Think of how much more you will be hurt if you let people take advantage of you and violate your boundaries. The boundaries are there either way. This is the thing we have to understand. You have your boundaries either way, whether you make them known or not. So it's better to make them known so that those in your life who are worth keeping around can respect them for you, because they respect you and they love you and they don't want to violate your boundaries. If they don't know your boundaries, they're gonna cross them. Even when they do know your boundaries, they're gonna cross them accidentally, but it's gonna happen way less and way less often, and you're gonna have the personal power that has returned to you from all the self-respect you got from setting boundaries, that you're gonna be able to just gently say, ooh, that's over the line of my boundaries. And it's not gonna lead to some big conflict or drama with people. So acknowledge what your boundaries are to yourself, and then start making them known and setting those boundaries. I want to leave you with this. Here is a example of a sort of a 3-step process, rather, where how you can learn to set boundaries. This is from Positive Psychology, and it's a simple 3 steps that will help you in setting boundaries if you have trouble setting boundaries. Step 1 in this boundary setting exercise is be as clear and straightforward as possible. And the trick with this is don't raise your voice. You say, I would prefer it if X, Y, Z. Okay, I'm going to go to this party with you, but I might have to leave halfway through because I don't have the same threshold for small talk that you do. Okay, it's not about saying like, yeah, but I have to leave halfway through, and you know that, so I can't believe you would blah. Just relax. Be as straightforward as possible and don't raise your voice. That's step 1, and that might take some setup on your part, some breathing exercises first, or even a little rehearsal before you go to the person to set your boundary. That's fine. Do what you got to do. You do you. Okay. Step 2. State your need or your request directly in terms of what you would like, rather than in terms of what you would not like. So instead of saying, I don't want you to speak to me in that rude tone, you could say something like, I would prefer if we could talk when we're both calm and we could be gentle. So it's framing it in a positive way. This is what could happen, rather than this is what I will not accept. Because that's not a boundary, that's a demand. I mean, it's a boundary, but it's a demanding boundary, and it will lead to more conflict. You can set the exact same boundary in a way that frames it up in terms of what you would like to have happen, which is positive, rather than what you don't want to have happen anymore, which is negative. That's step 2. And then step 3, this is the big one. Accept any discomfort at all that comes up as a result of you setting your boundary. You might feel guilt, you might feel shame, you might feel remorse, you might feel a little bit icky because you're not used to it. But I promise you, step 3 will get easier and easier and easier the more that you do step 1 and step 2 with skill and deftness. Because step 1, just be straightforward and don't raise your voice. Step 2, be direct and frame it in terms of what you do want. And then step 3, you'll start to get used to how other people might react, whether positive or negative. And you'll stop feeling over time so guilty or so ashamed or so remorseful about setting your boundaries, because you will get used to seeing how much empowerment you get back, how much self-respect you get back, how much internal self-efficacy and self-confidence you get back when you set the boundaries. And that's why setting boundaries is kindness, because it's kind to yourself and it's kind to the people with whom you're setting boundaries. Set them kindly and kindness will reign. Okay. Thank you, everybody. That's all I have for you. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here and for tuning in, as always. And if you're watching this from the future, thank you. If you're listening to this on the podcast, thank you. If you know anyone who might benefit from what you heard here today, then please share this video, tag this video, post this video, tweet this video. And if you want to learn more about me and what I do, you can visit my website at thebrianhogan.com for more information or to apply for coaching. It's right there at the bottom of the screen. Until then, I will see you next week for episode 5 of season 2 of Hot Mess Life Coach on Thursday, February 2nd at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. Until then, be hot, be messy, and be blessed.